Okay, today I'm going to be presenting playable quotes for Game Boy. How many of you here are familiar with this? Just to gauge some with the playable quotes, or think you maybe know what playable quotes is. All right. Okay. Cool. Well, that's what I'm going to be talking about today. But to kind of answer those questions, what does he mean by playable quotes? Let's talk about quoting media in general. So we know how to quote text, I assume. I didn't look up the proper way of quoting movies, but I'm sure there's a standard. We know how to quote video. And if I turn on my, whatever, it's a YouTube video of that quote. You've seen the movie and you know what's there. But how do we quote video games? Do you take a video of it? Do you describe it? What do you do for that? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So to give you a little taste, a little sample of what this is like, I'm going to show you a quote of a video game. So this is a quote from Legend of Zelda. This was a game that I liked playing a lot when it came out. And it looks like a video, right? It's going in and it's talking with the raccoon. But here's a little button I can press, take control. And now I can do something you can't do with the video, which is I am now taking control of the game. And I can go around and use it. But if I try to do something that wasn't in the quote, then it resets, because that is outside of the space of the quote. Just like if you read past the end of a quote in text, you can't do anything. You can't get into that, the rest of that piece of media. So that's what we're talking about. Who was involved in this project? It was myself, Kathleen, who is not here today, but she has been at FDG. You'll notice there's a lot of FDG influence onto this project. Also here is Adam Smith down here in front. And we were the ones who worked on this, and I'm going to be talking about it today. So in terms of, look at this. There's a problem. The problem is you're running Linux. One of the influences is the Game Interactive Software Scholarship Toolkit, which has a great acronym of GIST. So you can have GIST, get the gist of something. This is a way of, this is the initial start of how do you make a quotation, how do you cite a game. One of the cool things about this is that it's actually used as a citation inside of peer-reviewed, published work. And what's really neat is that you can see down here, this is an interactive version of Doom that is part of this actual publication. So this is one of the influences. Another thing that influenced this is this study on understanding user needs in video game moment retrieval. The main influence that this had is this was a bunch of interviews with different personas, and these personas here is kind of what influenced a lot of the thinking and kind of the, I would say, as this research was being done, that kind of opened up the door to this thing of like, wow, we need to have ways of resuming play, but this idea of like being able to show people a moment in a game and let them riff on it and use it and extend it. Another thing that I found very compelling was this idea of like, when you're trying to explain something to somebody, like I'll often explain to people about how like I think it's Quake, the rail gun doesn't do any physics calculation, but the rocket launcher does. It doesn't really make sense unless you actually use it. Like it's once you actually play the game and you see that little part of you can see how the physics are different. That's something that you really can't pick up in a video. And so these were the influences that went into playable quotes. There were a lot of things that are similar to playable quotes. So you might think of like, oh, in an emulator, you can do this. You can like have a save state in an emulator and have people load that up. You can have a save game in a normal game and do that. But what we think is unique to playable quotes, the areas that we've identified as being the key properties of what we would at least consider to be a playable quote are these four things here. So playability, partitioned, permanent, and performative. So let's talk a little bit about what all that means. So playability, this is the ability to actually take control of it. As you saw in that little brief demo, I was able to just hit, I want to take control. So imagine a YouTube video where you could just say like, yes, I want to go in and experiment around with that. That lets you do the what if experiments. It also allows you to pick up what the feel of the game is like. So seeing how Mario jumps differently in Mario 1 versus Mario 2 versus Mario 3, hard to convey in a video, but if you were able to actually interact with just that one little bit, it gives you a quicker understanding of that aspect of the game. For partitioned, this is one particular thing. The nice thing about quotes in other forms of media is that there's this established concept of fair use. So a professor who's studying media can assign a clip of a video and not worry that the MPA is going to come and break down his door and tell him like, you owe us all this money. It's been established in the legal realm. We were hoping that by showing this thing of, we only have a small bit of the actual game that is part of the quote, we were hoping that would, automatically unlock, like, yes, you have now unlocked the ability to cite games without legal consequence, but we've talked to about a half a dozen lawyers, and they're like, nothing in law is set in stone until like a judge has made a ruling. So, but that's the little question mark here on fair use. I like to think it's fair use, but I'm not a judge. So that's the partition bit, is that it is not the full game. It's just a tiny little piece of it. Permanent. This is an interesting aspect of that. By making this quote in the same way that like the Epic of Gilgamesh, like we've got like 90% of it. But it's all from you can consider quotes of the original text. They're not really quotes, it's like the tablets got broken. But what's neat about this is that the original game could just disappear, but you'd still have the ability to see part of it and interact with it and use it. And you'll see more of that in the demo, what that means. But this is great for doing things like archiving. We were also hoping that this might be useful in active game development. So if you're actively developing a game, you could just make quotes of the little pieces that you found interesting, or it could be a bug report. And you don't need to have the full build system to be able to recreate all the little intermediate pieces. And then lastly is the performative bit. So for those of you that were here for Holly Nielsen's talk, where she was talking about, here are these old games, but we're really not sure how they were used, but there were those pinpricks in some of those old game boards. In a quote, we also include the performance, the way that the person used it. So you can actually go back and study how it was played, or if there was a corpus of quotes, if there were hundreds or thousands of these, you could actually start doing analysis over the way that this game was actually played, because the button presses are part of that quote as well. Another thing that this does is it makes it more clear of what do you want the person to see. This is something that's missing from a ROM plus a save state. Is in that you just drop someone in the save state, they're like, now what? I just died. What was I supposed to do? And they don't know oh, you were supposed to start attacking the boss. So these are the four aspects of a playable quote. Again, as I was talking about these different aspects of game emulation, so we started with the Game Boy. So you got a little hint of what's next to come. There's various aspects. So for those of you that are familiar with game emulation, you'll kind of understand this, but let's just talk about it a little bit. So in most retro games, especially pre-90s stuff, you have a ROM, this read-only memory. That's the fixed game. That's the thing you can play, right? It's playable. If you've got game systems have RAM as well, and for those, you can have if you have a copy of that RAM, you can load in the save state. Then you can go to a particular moment. And if you have inputs, which are confusingly called movies in the speedrunning community, but if you have a sequence of inputs that you can play into the game, then you can see the performative bit. There was something missing, right? There were four pieces. What was missing? It was the partitioning. So this was new to me. I think it was Adam that pointed out that blackout poetry was a similar thing. How many of you have seen blackout poetry? Okay, so I'm not the only uncultured person here. I feel bad. This is really neat, right? So it's actually a way of taking existing media and transforming it and making a new piece of media. And what's really weird and was not intentional was that this is what a quote looks like. So this is that Legend of Zelda game I gave you a little preview of. What you're seeing here is the little colored pixels here are the actual bytes in the ROM. If this was the full ROM, it would be all colored pixels. But these little sections here are just what was needed for that little sequence that I demoed. And it looks a lot like blackout poetry. So the analogy actually goes further than you would think. As we were going through this, we were starting to think about like, what are other things that, certainly we're not the first to do this, and it turns out we're not. There was a cheating device that I did not know about. Apparently it was like this, it was called Action Replay and was actually released until the mid-aughts. This was, the Action Replay device was not just for PCs, but they had them for pretty much any system you could play games on. But if you were to take this box here that you see on this video and flip it around, on the back here, there's this little thing here about program save, and if I zoom in there, it talks about freezing your program at any point and to save the entire contents of the memory, including the extended memory, to a floppy. So now it was like you could have this quote that you could like take and move to other places. It didn't have the partitioned aspect, but it was a cool thing that it was like, yes, this was done, and it was quite an achievement having like a piece of hardware that would do it as well. I am going to put my computer online. I was trying to see what would happen if the network went out, but I am going to turn on this because what I want to show you now is a visualization of this. So you've seen me actually use it, but maybe you're wondering kind of what does this look like in reality? So let me go back in here. So here is Tetris. There's even a movie that you can see. Somebody asked how the movie was, and I told them everything falls into place at the end. So what we've got here on the left-hand side is what you would see if you were playing the game Tetris. And then on the right-hand side over here, that is your right, yes, you see the visualization. So everything that is a dark color here means nothing's happening. This is a visualization of the ROM, so the actual, the bytes in the game ROM that are being accessed. So when a read or write, or I guess in this case it's just a read, oh no, it's a read or write to memory, so this is just all the memory involved. You will see that visualized. So you're going through doing level select, and then as the different pieces are dropping, you can see kind of blinking on the side all the little bits of memory that are being accessed. This was not intuitive to me, at least. If you had asked me, how much of the ROM is actually used at any moment in the gameplay, I would not have guessed that it's about 6% is what you see here. I would have guessed much larger, but this is what it looks like. We have another visualization, and this was part of the aha moment for us. So we weren't even sure that this would work, that you would be able to just like slice out, partition out a binary, and with a save state, load it back up, and it would still work. But when we started playing with this, Adam made this visualization. So the way to read it is, this here is the parts roughly that you would see. So like here's the menu screen, and then as you see things dropping down, that's the various pieces that are being dropped down. And then you can see here when the screen's filling up, that's what that looks like. And then over here in this section, you can see these are the parts of the ROM that are being accessed. And then at the very bottom, you're seeing everything's hovering right about 5%. And so once we had this visualization, at least for me, that was the moment where I'm like, oh, this might actually work. So what I'm going to be giving you a demo of today is our prototype, which we call 10 Mile. Why is it 10 Mile? Well, there was a campground in California where we talked about this, and we're scheming on what we would try and how we would do it. So we named our prototype after 10 Mile itself. And so I'm going to walk you through I've described it to you, but now I'm going to actually show you. And if you don't believe me that this is real, you can even type in 10mile.quote.gains into your device and try it for yourself. But let me just show you. So I'm going to open up a fresh ROM. I'm going to play a little bit. I'm going to start recording. I'm going to show you kind of how much of the ROM has been accessed, then show you what a quote looks like, and then come back and explain more about those quotes. So if you go to the website, every image that you see here is actually the full quote. So the quote is actually embedded into the image itself. If you're familiar with the Pico 8 system, we use the same technique to embed a zip file into these images. And then for a full game, I've heard it is possible to get copies of these copyrighted games. I don't know how to do it, so what I'm going to do here instead is show you an open source game and load that up. So if you pay attention to the border here, you'll see the border changes as I go into different modes. So what I'm going to start here is start playing. And I'm going to go here, play a little bit. I can move around, but let's say I want to show a particular moment in this game. So I'm going to go down here, fall. And now here's the bit I want to demo. So I'm going to hit record quote. You see the border changes to red. And now what I'm doing is I'm going through and actually using this game itself. So I don't know if you can see it. It looks okay on the big screen, but I've only used 0.7% of the ROM so far. Let's use a little bit more. All right, now I'm going in here into this waterfall, jumping around again, and now I'm going to hit stop recording. So what's happened now is it went through and took all of those various aspects of what was needed and turned it into this image here, and that image has basically everything that you need to play that quote. So I'm going to go here and download it. I can save this as a PNG, or I can also go and play it. So let me do that here. Click play. Maybe that doesn't work, and since it is working. Playing. Oh yeah. Okay. So no. Previous tab. Thank you for your help. There it is. Okay. So you'll see here that you're watching what I was doing again. I must have been pausing, talking there. I'm there playing around, and by that any given time, as you saw before, I can take control and I can use it again. But then if I try to do something that I didn't do originally, it is going to reset. And the reset is basically meaning it's not something that was built in. It's just when you try to access a piece of memory that wasn't part of the quote, what do? When we were first running this, we just didn't do anything, and you get to learn all these fun things about games, like if you never touch a wall in the quote, then there's no collision detection, so you can just clip through walls. It's really nice. So that's the little basics of how to do it. So let's talk a little bit now about what's actually inside of the quote. For the Tetris game that I played, this is actually what's part of Tetris. So Tetris is a super small ROM compared to the Legend of Zelda. So we have just the little bits that you need, plus a mask. So this is what the emulator uses to determine, or the modified emulator uses to determine whether or not you're trying to access a piece of ROM that was part of the quote. We also include a save state. So this is what is loaded to get you into the part of the game where you need to run. And then we have the list of the actions, the button presses events. If you were paying attention, you noticed some of the things I did in the game, in the replay, it was slightly different. And that's for some interesting reasons that we talk about in the paper. You can learn more about there. So what's next? Beyond the Game Boy, the Game Boy is a game system. I thought that this was a mistake when I first saw it, but apparently the Game Boy is more powerful than the original IBM PC. It had a sound chip in it and a nice graphical display and graphic stuff. But the next step beyond Game Boy is to start getting into more generalized systems. Unintuitively, it's not really the size of the memory that's been the part that's been tricky as we've been doing our initial explorations. It's the amount of memory transactions that you have to do per second. So we were hooking into the actual individual memory reads in the Game Boy. If you do that in a x86 emulator, it gets really slow. So key takeaway is you can quote from a game by taking a complete snapshot of the game and the platform state, erasing the majority of the irrelevant data, and bundling this with the inputs of your performance, the play over time. We would like your help if you fit into these categories, come and talk to us, or you can send me an email or get in touch with us over Twitter. But these are the areas where we'd like help in particular, like instrumenting new emulators and virtual machines. You don't have to modify them, you can just instrument them. I can tell you about that. And all the other pieces that we mentioned here. So with that, here's how to get in contact with me and how to get in contact with us on Twitter. Any questions? Got one down here. Do we have a mic? Okay, we'll start back there.
Hello. Yeah,
Hello.
Thanks for the excellent talk.
Thank you.
My question is, do you have any visions for how this would work in a multiplayer setting?
Yes, the multiplayer setting, anytime where there's a network involved, gets really weird. So we've talked about different approaches where it is unlikely to work with like a public multiplayer server, but in theory it should work if you have like your own local multiplayer system and have that running separately. We haven't thought much beyond that, but it's been something that we've talked about. I mean, it gets weird, especially like how do you keep the TCP/IP stack in the right state, and the rail system has to deal with like a machine that was frozen in time and has been woken up later. But those are the basic thoughts is around either standing up like a multiplayer server that would be able to deal with the quotes or something else. But yeah, great question.
Right, thank you.
We got a question down here.
Hi, super cool approach and lots of thoughts that I might follow up with later. But one thing I'm thinking about is like, how do you account for sort of the hardware aspects of the experience? So I'm imagining like, say you had, I know you're only doing this with Game Boy so far, but you have visions for future things, and trying to convey like the idea of what it was like to play GoldenEye on the original N64 with that janky controller versus playing it on an emulator or something. It's very, like, you can appreciate how that experience is very fundamentally different, but I can't imagine how you would necessarily incorporate those kinds of aspects into the playability of the quote. Does that make sense?
No, it's a good question. I don't know if we've talked about that before. I mean, I would say it's similar into the general thing with any emulation. Like I just bought the N64 controller for the Switch because like now I can use it. But I mean, there's a whole other bunch of aspects. I would say that's like undefined, but in this demo, for example, I can show you here. To sort of answer your question, like this here was made so that you can actually use it on your touchscreen. So we added in these affordances, but there's actually, browsers have a gamepad API that I don't think we hooked it in, but we thought about it, which would then allow you to then hook in these older systems, but that requires more work. And for the true N64 experience, we'd have to maybe add a thing where it's just like, now your controller no longer works because you've used it too much, or we'd put in some like, but no, it's undefined. Other questions?
Thank you for a great talk. I can tell you how often it happens that I'm talking with games researchers quoting games to each other, and I'm the one left out because I don't know the quote. And this seems like an awesome system to solve that.
Yeah.
Given that many newer games aren't sliceable in this particular way, but they would like to be quoted, would you have advice on how to make modern games quotable, or how to design them in such a way that you can slice that too?
What do you mean they're not sliceable?
Well, in the sense that here it's a relatively small amount of bytes that you need to copy and leave
Right.
the rest out. And when you're dealing with a complete engine that you might need to copy as well, then maybe that becomes a little bit more difficult.
Our intuition is that it should work just as well in that you wouldn't get the full Crysis engine if you were running it, right? Or the Unreal Engine. You would get just the bits that were needed for that particular set of frames that were being rendered. Modulo the way that the operating system is like loading stuff into memory, but at least the intuition is at least at the memory page level. So whatever's like paged into memory, and then we just track which of those pages are being used while the quote is being recorded.
It's an independent, platform-independent way.
We have seen nothing to make us think otherwise.
It would be fantastic. I hope it's true.
Oh, and yeah, and Adam made the point of we're also planning quoting the operating system at the same time. So like the initial bits of research that we've done are promising still. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Other.
Yeah, you barely mentioned them during your talk. You mentioned them still. What about copyright issues of those codes? Since you take only part of the memory, maybe it's not considered as the full material. As you would take a picture, for instance, it's part of the game. Is it copyrighted or not?
I mean, that's what we were hoping. I mean, like, yeah, this is the quote, right? The thing about it is, I'm not a lawyer. The lawyers that we've talked to have basically said, like, it passes the sniff test, but it has to go before a judge and be determined in a court of law. Pragmatically, intellectually, I can't run this like this. You cannot, without the save state, and even with the save state, you cannot explore beyond the bounds of the quote. And so I would like to believe that this would hold up, but until that standard is met, we're waiting for a brave individual to tweak the nose of Nintendo, and then hopefully they would fund the court case to establish this precedent. So yeah, all I can tell you is I would like to believe that this would establish the fair use in that regard. But with that, thank you very much.